This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rapin. Joining me this week, two stories of revenge and murder in the forest. I'm joined by Kate Lamphere.
Hi.
And Kara Shimborski. Oh my gosh. Today we are here to talk about our Goodreads book of the month that we picked from a general theme of things, but we'll get into that in the second half of the show. For now, this is episode 319, and I have two legally mandated questions I need to ask, and that is, how have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Kara.
Okay, so I have reacted to the general chaos and upheaval in the world the past week by doubling down on my obsession with reading coverage of the Star Wars Galactic Cruiser Hotel at Disney World, which is opening this week, and media coverage has already started. I feel like I looked at everything bad happening in the world, and I have that on one side of my brain where I'm like keeping up with what's going on. And then on the other side of my brain, I'm like, but tell me more about this $6,000 2-night hotel stay that's really more of an active RPG game. So,
I mean, we have to find joy in this world in some capacity, and it just so happened that Disney released the most absurd thing, like in a real life existing kind of way, right?
For those of you who do not obsessively track news about the Disney parks, which, bless you, you have way more time in your life than I do for other things. They opened this, what they built as a hotel, but is really more of an immersive theater experience. They like, some vloggers are describing it as a sort of escape the room, choose your own adventure smorgasbord of activities for extroverts. Like, multiple people have said this is perhaps not a thing for introverts. So the more coverage I see, the more I'm like, I think I'm okay not spending $6,000 on it. This sounds very stressful. But you're like you enter the hotel and it's like, welcome to the Star Cruiser, and you're instantly immersed in this world on this ship. In the timeline, it's between movie episodes 8 and 9. So if you don't like the new trilogy, perhaps not the timeline for you. But it's like all new characters, and but Chewbacca's there also as a known entity. And that makes sense because anybody in a fursuit could be a Chewbacca. So that's but the initial reports seem to be that this is like a very time consuming, like, this is not you're on vacation to relax. This is you're on vacation to do a video game in real life. And so the initial reports seem to be like, if you like games, you'll probably like this. And if you really like Star Wars, there are a lot of things to like. But as like a casual person going, perhaps not the thing for you, especially when you're spending that much money. So So this
is less like going to Galaxy's Edge, where you kind of choose what things you want to involve yourself in, and more like, if you go to this thing, the experience is doing things nonstop throughout your stay. Is that what I'm getting out of this?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like either you're doing like all these side quests and stuff, and you have an app that's actually like in a video game. If you're tracking your quests and side quests, like, your app tracks those for you.
Holy smokes!
But it seems like if you're not talking to the characters and finding the next thing to do, your options are eat, drink, and I must emphasize that the drinks are not included, and cocktails run like $23 each. Or play.
What?
It's a cruise.
Are we sneaking in? Are we sneaking in fifths of vodka and water bottles that we resealed with a hot glue gun to this Star Wars fucking galaxy expense thing?
Yes. Oh my god. So I will continue to obsessively read all the coverage of this on-land cruise ship because it sounds insane. Like, if somebody handed me $6,000 and said, I will give you this on the condition that you go to the Galactic Star Cruiser, I would say yes, I'm bringing Brian and Kate with me. So you have to pay for them too.
Right.
But I just, oh man, it's just so fascinating that that's what this giant company decided to sink a lot of money into. So I will eagerly await additional coverage of this experience.
I have so many thoughts on this because I've been following it a little bit too, but maybe we'll talk about this in the break more. But I'm just like, I have so many questions and so many thoughts.
So many questions. We can do a mini-sode about the hotel that we haven't been to.
Right. The external perception of this hotel experience.
Oh my god. So in terms of comics for me this week, I got a stack out from the library that I'm excited to read, but before I get into those, I sat down the other day and read 4 books in a row by the cartoonist Sarah Anderson.
Oh
and
my.
her her comics are perfect. Like, I spent the entire day that I was reading these just taking pictures because I was like reading it on my screen and they don't let you take screenshots, but I was like, I'm a millennial. I know how to use my phone to take a picture. So it's just taking pictures of the comics on the screen and texting them to all my friends. And I'm sure that they were like done with me by the end of this day. But I was like, this one's funny and relevant too. I feel so seen, etc. But it's just these little like slice of life comics about, one presumes, the artist and her day-to-day life with like her cats and her friends and being an introvert and being a weirdo. And I think her style is like more like simple, bare bones, but not as like squiggly as the Hyperbole and a Half stuff. But similar to Hyperbole and a Half, I feel like even if I'm saying the artist named Sarah Anderson, you're like, I don't know who that is. If I showed you one of her comics, instantly you would be like, oh yes, because I feel like she's one of those artists where her work is just on the internet, even if she's not properly credited. So I very much enjoyed my deep dive. I read like 4 of her books in one day. Her like typical comic format is like 4 panels for a little story, and like sometimes the stories last multiple pages, but usually it's a one and done self-contained situation. I texted Tia the comic strip where the character's cat is just acting aloof for 3 whole panels and like doesn't want to be touched or whatever, and the second a door is closed in the cat's face, the cat just like smashes themselves against the door like meow.
Those are my cats, yes.
So it's just like those nice moments that are very relatable to a lot of people and captured with brevity and wit in these collections. So very much recommend if you're looking for something funny that does not require a lot of attention, which I think is a lot of people right now. So try the Sarah Scribbles books, guys. Also, I think they're all online. I think it's like a web comic, so I read them in book format because I'm a weirdo. But
yeah, I think she publishes it either on her website or via one of the many webtoon web comic based apps that I think you can read comics on. So you can definitely find Sarah Scribbles out there.
Yeah. I think I found them in a webtoon scroll. But again, I'm so skeptical of these things. I'm like, but did she post them or did somebody else post them?
Well, that's at least, good that you question that kind of stuff. We all should be questioning things like that, I guess. I don't know where I'm going with that. But yeah, is that all you read then, Kara? I don't want to cut you off.
Oh yeah, that's my comic moment. I guess my not quite a comic moment is I rewatched one of my favorite films of all time, Stardust, from like 2007, and that is based off of a Neil Gaiman comic book / story with illustrations, and it is one of the rare moments where I think the film is far superior to the original comic. Like reading the book, I was like, oh, this is really sad and depressing and not very compelling. And watching the movie, I'm like, I want to live in this world.
Yeah, that movie is magical. Okay, what about you? How have you been? How have comic books been? What else has been going on with you?
I feel like February has been a real bummer of a month, and it's not getting better. And I feel like my haven, my harbor, my like highlight in the last 2 years of this pandemic has been media. And I really haven't found a lot of media to super get into for most of the month, which has just not helped anything. But in the last week, Brian bought Horizon Forbidden West, so I've been playing that.
Nice.
And I went to a different branch of the library than usual. Very exciting. I was embarrassingly excited about it. It was a whole day of errands that I had to go out and run, and I was like, all right, the last thing I have to do is stop by this other library branch. And I was like, all right, when is that errand gonna happen? Come on.
This is like Kate just unlocked the new map in some video game and she finally gets to go and visit it.
Yes.
It's amazing.
I was envisioning her more like she's the Red Riding Hood character going to grandmother's house. She's just trying to...
Yeah.
She's like skipping through the woods of Michigan with her basket like, gosh, I hope I got some books today.
I've been watching K-dramas in the last like year and a half or so, and that's been one of the things that I've really been enjoying that's new for me, kind of new. And I finally stopped at a Korean restaurant and I picked up Korean food that I was very excited to try, and yet I was still more excited for the additional library.
Hold on. It sounds like you had a killer past week. Oh my gosh. Like, not only did you go to a new library, you also got some Korean food for the first time. I mean... And you got to play Horizon Forbidden West. Like, what the fuck, yeah. Kate? You're winning. You're killing it right now.
Living your best life over there, dude.
I mean, talk about a way to like try to make up for the absolute horror that is the outside world right now. Holy shit.
Yeah, turn it around.
What Korean food did you get? I'm very curious.
It's called tteokbokki, and it's rice cakes, which I really didn't know what those were, but they kind of were like these giant noodles, and except that they were rice and not pasta.
Oh man, tteokbokki's like one of my go-to things. Kelly and I make that every once in a while, and it is fantastic.
I'll have to try to make it. That sounds great. All right, so in terms of comics, which is why we're here, we
talked about the Star Wars thing for like 6 minutes. I don't even care. Post 300, we can do anything with this show. This is amazing. I'm so fucking excited for the both of you with the shit that you've got going on. Anyways, go ahead.
Okay, all right, books. So one of the books that I found at this other library branch was called Beyond the Clouds: The Girl Who Fell from the Sky by a manga creator called Nick. And the art reminded me of Castle in the Stars by Alex Alice, which is a bande dessinée. And it also reminded me of Go with the Clouds by Aki Airi, which is a manga. And then the story reminded me of just like any Studio Ghibli film, maybe specifically like Castle in the Sky. And this world in the story is like this tinkerer's medieval style village, and the people are all humans, animals, or like human-animal hybrids. You know, manga has a lot of people with cat ears, etc. This is not an exception. And this teenager, who definitely looks like a little kid, but is definitely like 16, finds this little girl with one wing, because her other wing has been removed violently in some way. She's like wounded, and he finds her in a junkyard and he tries to help her out. And his whole like little tinker's workplace found family adopts her, and they get into some dangerous situations trying to help her. And then the book ends in a cliffhanger, and I'm making this sound bad, but it's really good.
Okay.
And the rear matter, like I tend to read the rear matter and the front matter in books, and it talks about the creator's journey to become a manga creator, and also like her journey to write the story and the character design, etc. And it just like really added to my appreciation for this book. And then on top of this, Volume 4 releases this week. And the only thing that I'm mad about in all of this is that there isn't already like 10 volumes, because I immediately want the next, 10 volumes to read. So it's very good.
Looks really cute. Kodansha publishes this, and it looks like, they say it's ongoing, so I don't know how long it is, but I'll have to dig in to see how many volumes are published in Japan. But yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, that's a good point. There could be more of this that is just not translated yet. But I feel like this would be up your alley too. Like you and I really have this like fantasy comic manga in common.
I'm looking at the previews on Kodansha's website, and it looks really cool.
It's beautiful. It's really unique.
The way you described it made me think of Monstrous, which is a very different book.
Yeah, but it has like a similar. It is a very different book, but it has a similar, like the art style is like unique for the style of comic that it is. I
don't know how to describe it. It feels really bubbly is not the right word, but there's like a cutesy feel to the whole story, at least from the pages that I can preview of chapter 1. I might have to snag this just to check it out, see if I can get it from the library or something.
Yeah, I do recommend. I think that you would like it.
Cool.
And I read a lot. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is a book called Alexander Hamilton, The Graphic History of an American Founding Father. And the writer is Jonathan Hennessy, and the artist is Justin Greenwood. And I know this writer, or I'm familiar with this writer from another long titled book called The Comic Book Story of Beer, the world's first favorite beverage from 7000 BC to today's craft brewing revolution. So my point is that this guy really likes long titles. Anyway, this writer is very thorough, and his books take a really long time to read because of that. But I always learn a lot, and it's definitely like worth the effort. But this was a book that I had to like read a chapter, put it down, come back the next day, read another chapter. So it took me like a week to get through.
Mm-hmm.
And this book felt like a response to the Hamilton musical. And I know that it's like it's about the same guy. It's going to cover the same material. Like the same things are going to happen. But like I knew that the Hamilton musical wasn't historically accurate in some ways. And this book kind of seemed to like highlight where those inaccuracies were in the story. Like he was very specific about like the timeline of events and things like that. And even like down to the costume design of the characters, like Elizabeth Hamilton's dress color and style. It just it felt very referential.
I see. Danny in the chat is asking if there's a lot of rapping in this book.
No, but honestly, there were like a couple of things, and even just like the narration, not the direct quotes from the people, but in the narration where it's Jonathan Hennessy's writing.
Mm-hmm.
And there would be these turns of phrase that I'm like, that's out of a lyric.
Oh, man. I love that you read a comic about Alexander Hamilton for today's show, because while trying to assemble my thoughts for our topic later, I just realized I'm going to devolve into talking about why I didn't like the Hamilton musical and trying to explain my thoughts about the book that we read.
Oh my gosh. I'm so excited.
So, it's teasers for the next half of the show.
Yeah.
I had one more comic I wanted to just touch on briefly.
Go for it.
And this one is Horizon Zero Dawn Liberation, which is the second volume of the comic.
Kate, are you a fan of the Horizon Zero Dawn series or something?
Maybe.
Okay.
This book is by Ann Toole with art by Ben McCaw and Elmer DeMasso. And the first volume focuses on an adventure with if you're familiar with the video game, like I should have started there. This is based off the video game. And the first volume was an adventure with Aloy's mentor Talana. And this volume focuses on an adventure with her friend Erin, which is one of the first NPCs you meet in the game. Mm-hmm. And you learn more about the backstory of him and his sister, which I thought was like very good. Like I really enjoyed, like one of the reasons that I enjoy that game so much is because of all these NPC interactions and how they all have these like whole personalities, even though they're just like NPCs. And I don't know. I don't know that this would really be a comic book for somebody that doesn't play the game, because it is just like Aaron talking about himself and his sister while they go on like this little side quest together. But as a fan, I really enjoyed it. And I did want to say that like this didn't feel like it was connected to volume 1, other than it's in the same world and has the same protagonist. Like I think that you could definitely read these out of order.
Well, I was actually surprised. I mean, like, and I think that's why the Horizon Zero Dawn books, because like Titan has been sending us, comps and stuff like that for these series. And the thing I always notice is that they never label anything as like volume 1, volume 2, except for in rare exceptions. Like I think the Blade Runner series that they did like volume 1, volume 2, because it was supposed to be like a 12-issue series. And when I talked to, I think it was Henry Barajas, when he was on the show, he mentioned that Titan like never intentionally puts volume 1s or numbers on their series, because they want to be able to sell everything as separate like OGNs in a way. Like they want to be able to market everything, even if it's in the same series, as like you can pick this up and read it, which is why you probably see more stories like this that are kind of like standalone 6-issue volumes. which, you know, is interesting because I think when it comes to licensed properties, in my opinion, that's the better way to do things. Unless you have like a really long 60-issue story to tell with Aloy and her, you know, friends, why wouldn't you just write like an anthology and heavy quote series of like 6-issue breaks of just like different stories in the Horizon Zero Dawn universe, and maybe tie them together with an overarching thing, but ultimately just make them independent.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. It's a really interesting way to approach licensed books.
I feel like the Firefly comics ran into this problem where there wasn't space in the timeline to tell these big stories that they were trying to tell. So yeah, I agree that like just to do these little side quest stories for the people who are going to read these books already, you know?
Yeah, I maybe I should try these out. I like the Horizon Zero Dawn books, but I don't know. I can never get into video game tie-in comics, so who knows? But you seem to like these, so maybe, I don't know, Kate, your taste is pretty good, so maybe I'll trust you on this.
Aw, thanks.
I guess let me talk about some comics that I read. I've had a very busy week. I did manage to read some comics, but I have a little bit of an announcement. I told some folks on Friday when we had like a little friends hangout, but Kelly and I have bought a house in New Jersey.
Yeah.
So which is crazy to think about, but so I'll be moving pretty soon, and my life is going to become absolute chaos. I'm certain of it in the near future, but yeah, I'm going to be moving and all that other stuff. So I don't know how much comics I'm going to be able to read, because I feel like I'm just going to be tired of looking at screens, signing documents, and validating blah blah blah. But yeah, so that's like the only real exciting news that I have. Otherwise, I did read some comics.
Exciting news.
I guess. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of cool the fact that I will no longer have to live in a place that is far too small for the means that I wish that I have, and instead I'm just going to be, you know, an unbelievable numbers worth of dollars in debt. But you know, that's the price you pay for wanting to kind of own a piece of property, I guess. But yeah, Brian in the chat, in our Discord chat, by the way, if you're not hanging out with us live on Sundays at 1 p.m., what are you doing? Brian says that I'm going to finally have room for my comics. And no joke, that is the thing that I'm looking the most forward to, is that this house, this is not the only reason we bought this house, but one of the things that I thought was really cool is that in 2 rooms, there are built-in bookshelves into the wall.
Oh my God.
And I was like, yes, comic books can go there. And I can finally get all of my books out of the dresser that they're sitting in and put them out and show them off and stuff.
Amazing.
And so I'm very excited about that, as well as, you know, a place to have like an actual office that doesn't have to double as 2 other things, and to have a basement that I can put all my stuff and not have to share it with other people. And so I'm very excited to just have that happen. And it's, you know, it's just a new step in life, because eventually maybe I'll end up having a child or 2 or something in the future. And that's, you know, with more room, that makes it more possible. So,
Mike, you're going to have to choose between having a room as a library or having a child's bedroom, just like the Skyrim, like build it yourself houses.
Damn it, Kate. The harsh realities of life. Anyways, let me talk about some comics that I read, because I am very excited about both of them that I have listed here. So the first one I want to talk about, this is an advanced review that I got from Image, so I can't really talk too much beyond the synopsis. This is Ghostcage #1, written by Caleb Goldner and with co-written by Nick Dragata, who also did all of the art. All I can say about this book, or that I want to say, is that this is probably one of the most bizarre and enjoyable books that I've read in a long time. It's like the most insane batshit first chapter to a manga that you've ever read. This first issue throws the entire kitchen sink at you to try to tell a story about a hyper dystopian future where energy is the need for people. And there is a mega ultra, you know, takes over everything, controls everything corporation that kind of controls that. And I was so blown away by just how experimental and art focused this story was. Not that the story isn't there. I think that there's an interesting little like thing that Goldner and Dragata are trying to say in this book, but reading this alongside my reread of East of West, I'm starting to really understand the types of stories that Nick Dragata likes to tell. These bombastic, unbelievably far flung from our actual real world type of story. And it's the type of thing that you would expect to see in like a 2000 AD or you would expect to see, like, not necessarily marketed from Image. I feel like Image doesn't do books like this that are so batshit out there, like really crazy stories out there, and this book really did that. And all I can say is the art is absolutely incredible. Like, this is an art focused book. You can tell that Nick Dragata is experimenting with some stuff and trying some really interesting techniques. The story that I read was all in black and white, and I really hope that it stays in black and white. I don't know if it was because it was an advanced copy or what, but if this book goes into color, I actually think it will make it worse, because I could tell that Dragata was really leaning into the idea of shading and sticking to rough inks and pencils only. And I say rough, but just like there is I don't know how else to describe it, like an unfinishedness that makes the book absolutely perfect, that I think that color and flattening color and all that kind of stuff would ruin. And yeah, I super love this. Like, I think I'm gonna have to like get a physical copy of this book and buy the trade and try to get fucking pages ordered. Like, this is such a pretty book, and Dragata's art has only gotten better since his work that he did on East of West and you know, the other things that he's done. I really love this, and I think you would really make a mistake this week by not picking this book up. Like, I'm not being paid or promoted by anybody. Like, this book is unbelievably good.
Mike, I would like to sidebar about Caleb Gollner.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, please.
So Caleb Gollner is, first of all, delightful as a human being. If you one day in the future, when we're at comic conventions again, go to wherever Caleb Gollner is tabling and say hello, because he is just like I like interviewed him once upon a time for the Comixology podcast. And ever since then, like, whenever I go to a convention, he like remembers who I am and says hi. And so I'm just like, you're a good human. Good job. And also his books are so much fun. Like, you saying, oh, this is just everything and the kitchen sink. I'm just thinking like, yeah, because he did Task Force Rad Squad and Mermaid Evolution and Merpugs. Like, yes, and he's done like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle books. I just tried to send a copy of the cover of Mermaid Evolution because it makes me laugh every time in the chat, but it didn't work. But yeah, like his Task Force Rad Squad books, they're up on Gumroad, and I have a few of the paper copies that I've picked up at comic conventions, and I have like for a while he was selling like enamel pins of the merpugs, which are pugs that are also mermaids. It's just like this weird shit that's so delightful. And when I feel like when you read his stuff, you're like, man, this is just fun and weird. So I am delighted that he has a new book coming out, because I want more people to know about him.
Yeah, and I think we talked to him on the show a while back. I think we did an interview with him, and he was real fun to talk to. Yeah, I cannot express how great this first issue was. And looking at the Image previews page for it, it looks like it is going to be in black and white. So like, this book is going to fucking rule. So I hope everybody checks it out. It's a 3-issue miniseries. Really excited for the rest of this. The other book I want to talk about real quick is Bun's Comfort Corner. This is written and drawn by Chu Knapp. It's published by Shortbox. So if you're one of those folks that happened to get in on the last Shortbox Kickstarter that they did, where basically they they say this is a limited run of books that we're going to do. You know, you can get them all in this one big batch here, and then they're going to sell individual copies on their website. But usually they do like short print runs at this stuff. But anyways, this book is half comic book, half cookbook. It's a wonderful read from start to finish. You follow Bun as they live their life and try to survive in the simplest, most comforting foods that they know. Sometimes life is hard, and sometimes all we have are the comforts of the foods that we know how to make in the quickest and easiest way, right? Like, not everybody can say like, oh, I'm not feeling great, I'm going to order, Taco Bell or Burger King or whatever you need to go to. Instead, this book talks about all of the simple foods that Bun, aka Chu, who is writing this book, likes to make. So as they're talking about, I had a bad day at work, I really wanted to just go home and not do anything, but I need to make food, I made X. And then they walk you through literally how to make these things with photos and instructions. So it's each little story is paired with a food and a recipe, which I think is really fun. And I had a really fun time just reading this as someone who has tried to be more proactive and experimental in making food rather than just saying, okay, I know how to make X, let's just make grilled cheeses all the time. I have been trying to make more food, and to see these little like simple recipes that are supposedly very delicious make me excited, because my favorite thing in the world is saying, hey, take these handful of simple elements and make them into a super delicious food. So yeah, this is a really, really nice read. And I think that if you could get your hands on this, you will also find it to be pleasant, and it's just a nice little book to have. And maybe this is one of those things where, like, if somebody else can't get a copy of this, let me know, and we can mail it around like Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. I don't think that's the right reference to make here, but still, I like that idea of like just mailing comics around to people or something. So yeah, it's adorable, it's informative, and it's just a fun little comic book. And I fucking love that this is the medium that this book was put together in, because you could have just made a cookbook, right, and just been like, here are some simple recipes, and done that thing that everyone hates about recipe websites that they do intentionally for copyright purposes, where somebody goes, okay, so I'm going to make eggs and hash browns for breakfast, but let me give you my life story before I get to the actual recipe itself. There's a whole reason behind that. We can put on our tinfoil hats and talk about it after this, but yeah, this book, I like that there was this little fictional narrative as well as these recipes to go along with it, and I just like to go from Ghostcage to Bun's Comfort Food Corner makes me really, really appreciate this medium. So yeah, anyways, fantastic book. I totally loved it. But yeah, let's move on. Let's talk about comics that we're excited for, comics that we're going to be reading next, whether they're coming out this upcoming week or it's something that's on your backlog. We're going to be talking about the comics on the top of our pile. So I'm going to pitch things back over to Kara. What are you reading next?
Okay. So first of all, I'm a filthy hypocrite, and that's fine, because after in a previous episode me saying, I'm not going to read War of the Bounty Hunters, it's an event book, I'm going to read War of the Bounty Hunters, because now well, okay, now it's been collected and traded. I could get it out from the library, so I'll give it a whirl. I do like Charles Soule's Star Wars writing. How bad could it be? I'm just mad that they made it an event with useless tie-ins.
I'm so excited for the next episode that you and Nick are both on, because then we can really have a conversation about this.
Okay. Also on my top of my pile are the Hoxpox. Is that how I say it? Is it?
Yeah, sure.
House of X. You said it was Powers of 10? Is it Powers of 10? Okay, see, I had no idea. I just knew that this was a Buzzy X book, 2 years ago, 1 year ago? And
3 years ago.
Time is meaningless. So
yeah.
I just remember this was the X book, and I just kept seeing Hoxpox everywhere on my Twitter feed, and I had no idea that it was really Powers of 10 until I think Mike said it on a show a few weeks ago, and I thought, well, clearly I know nothing about this, but everybody read it, so I feel like I should read it to know what's going on. So I also picked that up from the library. And then keeping in theme with today's show about murder, I got a comic book to read called Murder Book by Hilary Fitzgerald Campbell. The full title is Murder Book, a graphic memoir of a true crime obsession. It is a book that they say is humorous, and I'm like, okay. Like, it's a kind of a memoir about the author's true crime obsession, and it basically looks like a 300-page playground for her to talk about this thing that she's nerdy about. So I always like books like that, and I thought, let me continue with the theme of this week's show and learn more about murder.
Amazing.
That's where I'm at.
Gotcha. Kate, what about you? What are you excited for next?
I'm excited for a couple of things that I've kind of mentioned before, and I just wanted to kind of like shout them out right now. The first one is The Me You Love in the Dark, Volume 1 by Scotty Young, and I think it's George Corona. And I was really impressed by the first 2 issues of this, so I've kind of been like waiting for it to come out as a collected volume, and here it is. The story focuses on an artist who moves into this big old house where like some kind of presence already lives. And the tone of the story, from what I've read so far, is like dark, but it's not really horror. Like, it's not a scary book. It's just like dark. I don't know how to describe it, but I really enjoyed it. And I've got a trip planned to my local comic book shop, I think I'm probably going to pick this one up physically, which is unusual for me. So
wow,
big recommendation. And the second book that I'm looking forward to is Witchy Volume 2. I've mentioned this before. Actually, Kate Scotchless also mentioned this before back in like the fall, seasonal reads for witch books. And this is actually a webcomic that's being collected physically. And it's about this girl who it's like a magical kingdom, but this girl has too much magic, and so she's kind of being
perfect,
ostracized in a way, and she has to decide if she's going to try to fit in or if she's going to like fight against the system. And I was just very impressed by Volume 1, so I'm gonna definitely read Volume 2.
Interesting. Well, for me this week, I guess before I get into my pick for this week or what I'm excited for, we do have a handful of folks hanging out with us on Discord. As I said earlier, we record every Sunday for the most part at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard. So if you want to come hang out with us, listen live, make sure you join the Discord, and you too can get a shout out on the show, just like our good friends Hugh and Danny, who are getting shout outs for their picks and books they're looking forward to next. Hugh is looking forward to The Nice House on the Lake, number 7, which I am also looking forward to that, but I picked another book. And Danny is looking forward to Batman Killing Time by Tom King and Dave Marquez, which is very exciting. I think, another Batman book by good old Tom King. What can't he do? Another Batman book? I don't think so. So my pick for this week is or I guess the book that I'm reading next or looking forward to next is Radio Spaceman number 1. This is written by Mike Mignola, art by Greg Hinkle, colors by Dave Stewart, and letters by Clem Robbins. I don't know what this book is, but I figure I should give a Mike Mignola book a try. Never really been someone to read Mike Mignola, no joke. I love Hellboy, the idea of Hellboy and BPRD and all that stuff, but I can't say that I've read more than Volume 1 of Hellboy, which is kind of blasphemous, and maybe I should read all of that this year. I should just read through the Hellboy stuff. But anyways, this is a new number 1. Greg Hinkle, you may know from Airboy or Black Cloud. He's also done a couple of other books, but this book it's going to have very pretty art. I think the stuff that I saw in Black Cloud was really pretty. I never read Airboy, but I think it's going to look nice. And Dave Stewart on colors is a perfect choice. Clem Robbins, I think, is also a regular on a lot of Mignola's books. So kind of standard high quality stuff that you're going to get. The synopsis for this book is: when a ship crashes and lands at a mysterious planet and some of the surviving crew go missing, the mysterious mechanical hero, Radio Spaceman, is called to investigate. But the planet hides so much more than the missing crew, and Radio Spaceman may be stumbling into more than he can even handle. Interesting premise. Sure. I don't know if Mike Mignola does a good sci-fi book, and I'm going to find out. I'll let you guys know. But yeah, looks cool. And honestly, at the end of the day, I just want the cover of this book as like a wordless print, or just to get the character here like tattooed on my arm. It's such a fucking pretty cover. If you haven't seen it, Google it. Radio Spaceman number 1. It looks fantastic. I just love the way that Mignola draws skulls and stuff. So yeah, looking forward to that stuff. But we're going to take a quick break here, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about our Goodreads book of the month, In the Pines, 5 Murder Ballads. And thank our friend Nancy for picking this book and nominating it as part of our February book of the month. So we'll be right back in just a second. This week on I Read Comic Books, we are talking about our Goodreads book of the month, In the Pines, 5 Murder Ballads by Eric Creek, published by Fantagraphics. Kate, do you want to tell us a little bit about why this month's book of the month was a little bit different than our normal books of the month?
Yeah, for this month on Goodreads, we decided to do like this U-Pick style where we had a predetermined theme, and then all the users could pick their own book that went with that theme. And this month's theme was non-traditional art styles. So if you're still interested in doing that, we're actually pushing that forward through March for that U-Pick style, and you can just like pick your own book and talk about it on the thread, and you don't have to like read what we're reading. But for the episode, we did pick a book out of all of the nominations, all of the books people talked about. And we settled on Nancy's pick for February, and that was mostly just because it was on Hoopla and Comixology and easy to find. Also, I really like the cover.
Yeah,
but it is about murder, And there are themes of sexual assault and lynching in addition to murder and violence. Did not think that one through, but we'll get into that.
Yeah. So yeah, like, this is a pretty wild book, all things considered. I didn't know really what we were getting into. I thought it was going to be like a more spooky, scary, like the Appalachia is going to destroy you, be mentally and physically and blah, blah, blah,
Was
but
that
this was
not your takeaway?
Well,
that
here's the
was
thing.
hella my takeaway.
I absolutely thought that this book was going to be about like the spookier side of the, living in the forests of the Appalachian Mountains. But instead, the moral of the story of every single story was murder bad. And like, that's pretty much it. So personally, my initial take on this was I wasn't a huge fan of it, but I do have thoughts about each of the individual stories. So I guess like Kate, Kara, what was your takeaway from this book? What did you like? What did you dislike?
I like the idea of I like adaptations in general, but this book took songs and adapted them into stories, which was really fascinating. And then also there is a place for like these banjo ballads that these songs are, if you look them up.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're like really good to listen to, even if like the subject matter is kind of sad. So I did like that, like the creator took took a risk and did this. Just the idea of, again, comics can be anything that they want to be. And this is an example of that, and I liked that about it.
Okay. Kara, what about you?
So I went into this not really knowing about the specific genre of murder ballads, but in my head kind of putting them in a similar category to sea shanties, since that was an earlier pandemic moment. I'm thinking like, okay, we're telling a story, so it makes sense that a story would make for an adaptation. But so I sat down and I read the book first, and then after I read the book, I realized that I would need to listen to the song to see, like, okay, so I didn't have to, but I was thinking about, I forget where I read this, but with the Oscar nominations out and so many nominees this year for Best Actor or Actress were like somebody playing a real person in like a biopic or something. The article that I was reading was arguing that the reason the Oscars keep selecting actors for those categories who have played a real person is because then there's a way to judge their acting more objectively, because acting is whatever you want it to be and it's super subjective. But if you have an actor who's playing a real person, you can look at the real person and be like, how close to the real person did this person get? So it makes it like a cleaner comparison, I guess, for judging purposes. So after reading this comic, I was like, I could just sit here with this comic, or I can go and listen to the songs and see if they did a good adaptation, or if I think that they should not be up for Best Actor this year. That was like my thought process. And it was very interesting because when you're listening to a song about murder, and kind of like what you were saying about expecting this to be about like the spooky horror of the woods in America. And
I do want to put like a little caveat on that, in the fact that I didn't like put things together until after I finished the entire book, and there's an afterword that's about murder ballads, and I was like, oh, this all fucking clicks now. I wanted more, when I don't know, that's all, but I'll talk about that more.
Yeah, because they explain that the format of a murder ballad is, let me tell you a story, kids. Murder's bad. Don't do it. So doing an anthology of stories based on that type of song, like, yeah, they're going to be a little repetitive in terms of what the end game is for each of them. But I thought it was very interesting listening to the songs versus reading the stories, how the tone was different in each of them. Like, I was expecting all the murder stories to be like darker or bleaker, and then listening to the songs, some of them I thought were actually not very dark or bleak sounding, but the comic did a really good job of conveying that mood. So that contrast was interesting. But what did you think about the like going through this book not knowing what they were and then saying, God, it's the same story.
Well, I mean, and I don't want to like rag on, you know, anyone for picking this book or if you enjoyed this book. I don't know, like a lot of this, the stories all felt the same, you know, and, you know, in hindsight, you know, looking at the songs and seeing, you know, I listened to the performances. Fortunately, Nancy, who picked this book, wrote a very wonderful review of this that, you know, provided links to recordings of all of the songs that each of the stories were based off of, which I thought was really nice. You know, taking that content and trying to pair it with the stories themselves, I think adds a little bit more flavor and depth to them. But, you know, going into this without knowing that, I was just like, holy shit, it's just about, oh, they killed someone and they feel bad about it. Murder's haunting, yo, ain't it? Like, yeah, no shit. Like, and again, I'm coming at this with like a 2022 lens of like stories have evolved and these are the things that, you know, people wanted to tell stories about in song back in, you know, the day. But I also felt like if you are writing a story in the year of 2017, right? This book was published in 2017, so maybe 2016 or whatever you're writing it, you do have the ability to interpret them in your own ways and show the things that you want to show and portray things the way that you do. I felt like every story was hopeless in the end. No matter what happened, there was no like resolution that resulted in any sort of satisfactory end for me. And that kind of sucks, to read through 5 stories and have them all kind of be like, and he was haunted by the murder. Like, okay, that's fine. And you get that, I guess, like, I don't know. There is some, I'm trying to like justify my reasons for not liking this, but like, honestly, like every single story rubbed me the wrong way more and more as I read through these. Like there was some tone deafness in here that I was like, you know what, if you're going to include lynching or you're going to include rape, you don't have to show it constantly. It doesn't have to be the focus of an entire fucking huge panel, you know? And maybe, you know, I don't know, that's me maybe being like, oh, I don't want to see bad imagery, but also like there are intelligent ways of showing that kind of stuff without it being graphic or almost, I don't want to say celebratory, but like,
it's the Game of Thrones thing, Mike.
It was almost like, yeah, exactly, right? I don't know. I felt like there was a couple of panels where I was just like, okay, we did an episode about the male gaze a long time ago. This panel is that. Like, this is the male gaze. This is not done for anything to benefit the story. This is done to show a woman with big old boobies, and I'm like, that's it. Like, and you're trying to tell us like these stories here that are reflective of the American experience given a certain time period, and I get that. You could have omitted things and I would have still gotten the story. You know what I mean? Artistically. Because I think that's if you look at the text themselves and just say like, is this a story about the story that happens in the song? Totally. Every single one of them pretty much hits that nail. I mean, he interpreted some things, whatever, but some of the imagery in the book, I was just like, not needed. Totally not needed, dude.
Yeah,
that's me.
It's so interesting because I didn't even notice that the points that you're making. I was focused more on the, like, once I was going back and listening to the songs, how some of the adaptations I thought did a better job than others. Like the one that I really liked the best in this comic book was I think it was.
We should have said full spoilers for the record.
Oh,
I'm sorry, we're a little late
spoilers.
To that. Full spoilers for this book if you haven't read it. My apologies.
Like I thought the long black veil story with like the man is wrongly convicted for murder and he's not going to tell his alibi because his alibi was sleeping with his best friend's wife. I thought that was embellished in the comic to indicate that perhaps the man who knew that his wife was cheating on him all along and framed the other man, and I thought that added like a great level of depth. But for the other stories, I felt like a lot of the flourishes were more superfluous. Like the story about Taney Town, about the like 22-year-old black man who goes to the neighboring town while his mom is out of town and stabs a man and runs away, and then another man hangs for it. There were just like all these embellishments to that story in the adaptation where it was like, he's maybe mentally slow and his mom is a sex worker and he's having flashbacks to his dad killing Germans in the war. And I'm like, there's a lot going on and none of it is helping with the story. Like nothing is adding to the story. like the things that I were picking up most on were sort of the tone switches. Like you were saying, this book to read is like kind of a downer because everyone's just getting murdered and everyone's afraid. But listening to some of the ballads, I thought the tone being ignored was the thing that bothered me the most. Like in the Caleb Meyer story, where like you were mentioning the story with a rape shown pretty graphically. And then like the woman who is the victim of this, who's like super pregnant, and it's heavily implied that it's because this man raped her, and then she's like just living in fear after the event. She like killed the guy in like very clearly portrayed as self-defense, but is still like living in fear of his ghost. And you see over and over again the look of fear on her face. She can't sleep. Her husband wakes her up in the middle of the night because she's like freaking out, and she's still freaking out. And listening to the song sounded more of like, yeah, get out of here, you don't bother me, I already murdered you, what are you doing? And it's just this like such a contrast. So now I'm like looking back at the comic, I'm like, I don't know if this adaptation is faithful to the tone of the source material, and it's weaker for it.
yeah
But I do want to talk about the art, because I mean, that's why we're here. We were talking about different art styles for this month's book. The style in this book was pretty consistent. I thought that to me, it was like clearly influenced by the woodcut printing style. Like if you look up a woodcut art style, you just see all these blocky black and white shapes. And then each of the stories in this comic they had like a color tone to separate it from the other stories, but it was all this basically like black and white, more bold shapes. And I thought that was a very intentional and interesting choice, because that is considered more of like a folk art. And so having more of a type of folk song and folk art as an expression in this comic book format, I thought that was a very good choice.
Yeah, I agree. It's also interesting to me. I think I've talked about two color art on this show before. And I mean, I'm a graphic designer, and sometimes I have to do two color books. And one of the reasons that two color is a thing is because it saves some money in printing. Like you're only paying for 2 inks instead of 4 inks, but then you still have some color in the book. And it was interesting that each story in this book has a different second color, because that means that they paid for full color printing for the whole book. So it's just an interesting like color choice, very intentional, like what Kara said. And it's interesting to me that even though they have these two colors that they can play with and like maybe mix them together in some ways, like you could get a lot of variety in the color, and instead they have your color is either full black or the full color of the second color as like the highlights or the shadows. And it was just a very like dramatic, I don't know if that's the right word, but it's definitely a look, and I liked it. Like, I mean, stories aside, like this art is really interesting.
Yeah, it seems that this is Creek's kind of art style in general, and I totally agree. It definitely hit the mood. Like for every single story, the haunting feeling existed. I totally agree with that, but go ahead, Kara.
Yeah, this apparently this artist got the most international recognition from an adaptation of some H.P. Lovecraft work.
That tracks, yeah.
Right. So then after that, I was like trying to look up, like, how do I get my hands on this Lovecraft adaptation?
Yeah.
Like, this is it. This is great.
The part of me worries, though, because it feels like if this is the way he adapted the murder ballads, God help us with how he adapted the H.P. Lovecraft stories. But that's maybe just me.
I want to say something about the back matter of this book, because like you were saying, Mike, you got to the end of this book and then they had the explanation of this is a murder ballad and it is going to moralize and tell you about this. I liked that section, but I wanted a little bit more, because you have to assume that most people picking up this book are not intimately familiar with the history and the style of the murder ballad in American culture. And
that was me.
Right. And like, I have no idea. So I just was reading that one little piece where they said, oh, yes, we made some adaptations. We made some changes from the songs. And I finished the book and then thought to myself, I would really have loved an essay or two by like a historian or a cultural anthropologist who was explaining the background of this type of music and, you know, maybe diving into the choice of the art style and how that relates, because it did feel like there was a missing piece to explaining why this project happened in the first place.
Yes. It would have been nice to see even like a foreword from the author or something about why they were drawn to this work. Because again, going into this blind kind of feels like, hey, you want to read some sad stories? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because we're talking about a different art style, but we also are like fundamentally we're talking about an adaptation here. And this is why earlier I was like, I'm going to talk about why I didn't like Hamilton. So
yes, please.
Okay. So this is my sidebar soapbox. So I saw the musical Hamilton. I really wanted to like it. I understand that it's good, but since I saw In the Heights first, I was like, God, all this music is the same. And the women were written better in the Heights. I'm not talking about the movie. I refuse to believe in the movie's existence because I thought that was a bad interpretation. Anyway, so Hamilton, spoilers for those of you who have somehow missed this particular cultural juggernaut, but you're following the life of Alexander Hamilton, and the female characters are predominantly the Schuyler sisters, who are three like rich ladies in New York, and one of them marries him, and all of their lives are kind of entwined with his. In the last song of the show, all the characters who are like remaining after Alexander Hamilton's death explain like what they do after the end of the show. It's like a looking forward thing. And his wife is like, anyways, I spend the next like 50 years of my life doing all this cool shit that women weren't doing at the time, and I was awesome. Anyways, good night and have a good time. And I'm like, what? So for me, like, I left that musical really frustrated and upset because I was like, you made me watch a boring dude just be full of himself for 2 acts when you could have had the 1 act rushing through the greatest hits of Alexander Hamilton and then getting shot. And the second act could have been all about his wife doing cool shit after he's dead, because they make it very clear that the only reason people know about him as a figure in history is because his wife spent the rest of her life talking about how cool he was. I want that story. So the reason I bring this up
didn't Hamilton write like 500 Federalist Papers or something? I mean, come on, that's worthy of an entire Broadway show, right?
I just felt like because they did like a side note at the end, almost like a throwaway. Anyway, his wife was cool too. And I was like, no, it could have been so much cooler. So that came to me while thinking about this book about murder ballads, because a lot of these murder stories did have to do with a woman. And in reading the comic adaptation, I have this little voice at the back of my head when I'm reading media, and sometimes it will just say, a man wrote this. And I had that feeling for a few of the stories in this comic book. And so like that's partly why I went back and listened to the songs and found that in the songs, generally the women were more calm and collected and less afraid and more like sure of themselves. And so then I was like, man, I'm totally justified in thinking a man wrote this, because a man chose to interpret these narratives of these women being like resourceful in a shitty situation and interpreted that as, and then they were terrified to even fall asleep. And I'm like, come on, dude.
Right. And I think in the case of like the story about, what is it? Where the wild roses grow, like that story showed a woman who was like, able to fool the coppers and all this kind of stuff. And I like that. But at the same time, there was like a moment where the guy who breaks out of the jail, or who's broken out of jail, shows up, and she's like, what are you doing here? And then he's like, I'm gonna have a sandwich. She's like, good, I'll feed you. And then she kisses him for no reason. It's like, what the fuck is happening? Like, all you needed was an extra panel or two where she's like teasing him or something, and like shows that she's in control of the situation, rather than this reveal that, oh yeah, by the way, she was like, if you listen to the story, that's not even, or listen to the song, that's not even how the song goes. Like, yeah, the interpretation here was kind of weird on a lot of these songs, which again kind of goes back to my feeling kind of uneasy about the whole book, because it felt like all of them were weirdly interpreted with like a non-American, and again, this is me being like stupidly patriotic in a weird way, but just like to see someone who is a Dutch creator interpret American history in through the lens of someone who doesn't live here and try to tell that story, ends up with like a lot of stereotyping, whether they're like and like, I guess, taking like blatant understandings of things and not trying to actually understand the root of them. And then when you put it on the page, it comes off as just like gross, like this is how things were, which is like not good. It just, for a book published in 2017, this felt very tone deaf. I don't know.
Well, that's where, to your point, having a note from the artist at the start of the book would have been really useful in him saying like, oh, you know, I heard this story and it reminded me of this folk tale that I grew up with, and so I decided to take it in that direction. But because we don't have that kind of introduction, additional material, we just don't know, and so we're left to just be like, close, I guess. Like, I see where you were going with this, but I actually did like that Where the Wild Roses Grow story that you were talking about, where I did think that it had a really good twist in comparison to the song. But you're right, that part where the convict arrives at the house and she's like, oh, let me make you some eggs to go with that food that you're stealing from me also, mwah. And it's like,
yeah. You know, and the thing is, like, we see stories like this all the time, and they are done better. And I think this is where a lot of my frustration with the book comes from, is that all of these stories had the potential, I think, to be great, and instead they were just okay. And maybe that's because of page limitations, maybe just like, again, the interpretation of the artist and what the stories that they were trying to tell. But I would love an annotated version here to try to get some of this. I don't know. Kate, what were your other thoughts on this book? I want to hear some more from you, if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Where the Wild Roses Grow is probably also my favorite story. Like, the sex definitely wasn't necessary at all, but I feel like everyone keeps their agency for most of the story. Like, sure. The sex was consensual, at least, and so the person that gets murdered was murdered in the first few pages, and we never learned who that was, or, you know, what their story was or anything. So that wasn't a person that kept their agency. But the main two characters that the story focuses on, like, they're in control of their own bodies until a moment at the end where, you know, a second murder does not happen, but could have. And then you have the twist where the woman was, you know, kind of like a badass all along. So that was definitely the highlight for me. I think possibly because the murder happens first and then you get more story after it.
Well, it's the only story that doesn't have the same moral of like, murder will haunt you, like, which seems to be the general. And like, I get that to an extent. Like, the, you know, the moral of a lot of these stories is, and even in the songs, is that, like, you know, going out and killing someone just because it might be easy to do isn't the right answer, because it haunts you for the rest of your days, and it drives you to insanity. It'll drive you to jumping off of a boat. It'll drive you to seeing dead people talking to you. It'll drive you, you know, just in general crazy.
Right.
But I also think that, like, there are better ways to interpret some of that rather than having almost every story feel the same. But again, I feel like I'm just belating the same point over and over. So
I do have some questions for you guys once you're done discussing the book.
I'm done. Give me off this train.
So first of all, the theme for the Goodreads Book of the Month was non-traditional art styles. So first of all, I want to know if you have any go-to books that you recommend anytime this idea in comics comes up.
That's a really interesting thought, because I think a lot of times I will try to go to like a Matt Kindt or a Jeff Lemire. I think a lot of people will, if only because those guys do really interesting watercolors. Like a Tyler Jenkins is also, I think, in that same boat, where it's not just your standard like Spider-Man, Batman style with which there is a look to that, I think, in modern comics. But those guys are doing some really out there stuff. But if we're going like extreme out there, Ray Fawkes is always a go-to for me as well.
Actually, the first thing that screamed to mind was the art for Odyssey. That
oh my
comic.
God, Christian Ward.
Yeah, like like that book. I just remember attempting to read it, being aware that it was extremely over my head, but I just got like a flash of bold color when you said non-traditional art, and I was like, Odyssey. When I think of the more like what we think of when we think of an American superhero style comic book, and getting so excited when artists do try different things, I do think about that Batwoman run from 10 years ago now, maybe 15 years ago.
I think it was Hayden Blackman and J.H. Williams III.
Yeah. Like that was a book that was gorgeous and ended too soon. But I think of that because they were doing really interesting things with color and tone and shading and like really elaborate double page spreads that were like just so visually arresting to look at. But you really had to kind of like concentrate on everything because there were all these details in what were going on. And that's still a traditional art style, but I think of it as non-traditional because they were getting outside of panels, and not just to get outside of panels, because that helped tell the story that they were trying to tell.
Yeah, Danny pointed out in the chat the book that should have come to mind first for me, and I can't believe it didn't, which is Martin Simmons in the Department of Truth. That book is wild. And Kara, what you just mentioned reminds me of Marco Rudy's work, like anything that he's done, but in particular his the book that he did with Matt Kint on writing, which was the Spider-Man or Marvel Knights Spider-Man, I think is what it was called. And I think the title of the story, which wasn't on the cover, was called 99 Problems. It's a wonderful, wonderful miniseries if you just want a fucking out there crazy Spider-Man story.
And what was that book that we all read and liked from last year? That it was like that Snow White interpretation. I'm gonna look it up.
Yeah, I don't think all of us liked it, but yeah, the I say from my own personal perspective, Snow Glass Apples. Yeah,
very unique style.
Very interesting style though. The art was very beautiful.
Yeah. I always go to Eleanor and the Egret by John Layman and Sam Keith, and it's just such a unique. I don't know, like all of the human designs are caricatures, but then everyone has an animal, and all of the animals are like pretty. I mean, it's a comic, so they're still a little cartoonish, but they're pretty accurate. And the juxtaposition is just kind of funny to me. And then the story is about like, think of this high society lady and her stork doing art heists. So it's just like a really unique book, and
that sounds delightful.
The art takes some time to get used to because of like the way that faces are drawn. But I just think that it is. It's such a whimsical story.
It's a beautiful looking book from Aftershock. Holy smokes. Sorry, I'm going through some of the pages on Aftershock's website. That's a gorgeous looking book.
Yeah, drop that in the chat.
Yeah, I posted a link for all y'all.
I don't even know how to describe this art. Like it's almost like it started with colored pencils and watercolors, and then was like combined digitally or something. Like I really want to know the process behind this.
Yeah. I mean, I could probably keep going with the list. Kara, was there anything else that you had?
No, I'm fixated on this Eleanor and the Egret book now. Thank you.
Well, my other question for you guys is that did you look over the thread in Goodreads where there were other suggestions, and then do you want to read any of the other books that were recommended there?
I actually think that this book that we read was my top pick.
Mm-hmm.
Just looking at everything, because I just at a glance we're talking about like, oh, sometimes comics have cool covers, and then we choose by that. But I mean, the cover for this book was really bold and striking, and I was just like that immediately drew me in. I think more than any of the other ones. So I was glad that we chose this one for the episode to talk about, even if once we got inside, it was perhaps not the thing that we all thought we were getting.
Sure.
I
did like. Go ahead, Kate.
I was just going to say, I think that we were all pretty much on the same page about wanting to read this one.
Yeah, that cover will get you every single time. And I'll throw that out to the folks who are listening from Goodreads. If you want to get us attached, put an image in your comment. That'll suck us right in. One of the ones that I really wanted to pick out or wanted to check out, I think I bought a copy, like a physical copy, because it looks so cool. It might be coming. I can't remember. Was Skip by Molly Mendoza. This is one that was nominated by Aaron. That one, just the picture that Aaron posted alone was like, okay, I got to read this. This looks insane. I'm gonna paste a link to that in the chat. But the other book that I really thought was interesting was that someone posted. Some people did post Odyssey and some work about Department of Truth and stuff. But the other one that I thought was killer, where I just had it, Parallel Lives by Oliver Schrauen. Say. That one looked insane, absolutely insane. I mean, the whole list on our Goodreads was
really good,
was wild. Like Shade the Changing Woman was up there. Tilly Walden's Alone in Space, 100% agree with that. A lot of really, really good stuff. Like I'm so excited for next month to see what everybody does or nominates, because I think we're getting a lot of killer books out of this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I want to check out Lind Ward. They've got a couple of different novels out that they're all wordless, and the art starts with woodcuts, like actual woodcuts. And it seems like they are kind of hard to find, because part of my trying to figure out which book we were going to pick to cover was to see if other people would be able to get them. And this one, I was like, I couldn't even figure out how to get it. So, but I'm sure I could do a little bit more research, maybe do like a special order or something and track one down.
Yeah. That's what Patreon money's for, just let me know. Well, yeah, I guess any final thoughts on this book before we wrap up here? Anything? I guess we recommended, I think, a lot of really good books. If you're maybe not into In the Pines, but still, I think my final thoughts on this would be, I think that there is value in reading this book, but know going into it that it's going to be a rough read. That's my kind of takeaway. Kate, what about you? What are your last thoughts about this book?
I don't know. I feel like I just need to reiterate that like the creator really did something unique here with adapting a song. And yeah, like maybe it's not for everybody for sure. But still, like I'd like to see more of this kind of adaptation. This is something unique that I haven't seen before.
Definitely.
Yes.
Kara, what about you?
I am glad that we stepped outside our collective comfort zone.
Yeah.
It was great. And I also got to listen to some music that I wouldn't otherwise have listened to. And now I'm sure my Spotify recommendations are going to be all over the place.
Yeah, that's maybe, same here. I clicked on all those YouTube links and I'm pretty sure the algorithm's like, oh, so you like folk music now, huh? Like, oh, hold on, slow your roll. Well, cool. Well, thank you both for joining me this week on the episode to discuss this. I think this was a lot of fun. Despite our varying opinions on it, I do appreciate, stepping outside of our comfort zone, just like Kara said. But next week's episode, you can join me, Nick, and Kate as we talk about comics that are constantly, I should say Kate Scotchless, as we talk about comics that are constantly having us look up things on Wikipedia to determine whether or not they're real or fake. And sometimes it's better not knowing the truth. So look for we're just going to do spooky month here in March. So I don't know what's up with that. But as always, you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow Kate at Kate Elfier. You can follow Kara at Kara S. Sam. And you can follow me at Mike Rapin. And you can follow the show on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at IRCB Podcast.
This episode first aired on Patreon, and is possible because of our wonderful patrons. Join today for exclusive series like the IRCB Movie Club, Saga of Saga, and more. You can follow that at patreon.com/IRCB Podcast. And if you haven't already, please rate and review our show. 5 stars really does help us on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts, because, we deserve it.
We got to get those Spotify numbers up. So, folks, go rate us on Spotify. You love us. Please.
Join the IRCB Discord community to chat comics and more. Plus, you can listen to our episodes live as we record every week. There is a link to our Discord in the show notes. Podcasts grow best when spread by word of mouth, so why not tell your friends, family, and local comic shop about I Read Comic Books?
We'd really appreciate it. Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all of our music, and we love them for that. Zander is our very cool guy who edits the show. He makes us sound great every week, and you know what? We just love him to death, you know? I want to say thanks again to Kate and Care for being on this episode. Thanks to Danny and Brian and Cinco and Hugh and everybody who was hanging out with us in the Discord chat today. You were fantastic. Thank you for doing that, and thank you to everyone out there who listens to the show. We love you to death. We love you to pieces. Until next time, comics are good, and so are you.